Great. Well, my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am an Alumni Relations Officer here at SAIS in Washington, D.C. And I am here today on January 9th, 2013, with David Korn, who graduated after being 1 year at SAIS in Washington, D.C. in 1957. And we're doing an oral history interview, and we're just going to kind of have a conversation. And thanks so much for being with us.
Quite welcome.
Yeah, so why don't we start with what originally brought you to SAIS?
I was interested in the Foreign Service. SAIS was in Washington, and I needed an American degree. I had had 2 years of college in the United States. Then I was in the Army. Yes, it was during the Korean War period. But I didn't fight the war in Korea. I was sent first to Germany and then to Paris. And
Wow.
It was luck, yes. In Paris, then after I finished my military service, I believe it was in September-October 1953, I went into the Institut d'études politiques, Sciences Po, and did the full 3-year program there. And so I had a French degree, but I didn't have an American degree. So SAIS, I wanted to get it fast, if you wish. I went down to Bologna and was interviewed there, and it was agreed to give me a tuition scholarship and allow me to finish the program in 1 year. Anyway, that's basically what brought me to SAIS. I wanted something practical as well, and once I say I wanted an American degree, I wanted to refamiliarize myself with the educational system in this country.
That's great. And tell us about that 1 year. What were your experiences while you were at SAIS?
Well, I worked very hard. I don't have a recollection of anything particular that happened, but it was very good overall. I wish I could remember the names of all of the professors. I'm sure if somebody mentioned them, I might remember some of them, but I considered it a very good program. It was a small school, as I'm sure you know. It was a red brick building there on Florida Avenue, right down from the Hilton Hotel. I'm not even sure the Hilton Hotel was there then. It was a small class. I don't think there were, in my class, maybe 20, 30. Mm-hmm. Some of them, a few I encountered later in the Foreign Service. Most of them, I think, may have gone elsewhere. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it was a very useful year for me, and I had taken the Foreign Service exam, the written exam, in Paris before I came back to Washington. And well, I hadn't taken the oral yet, but I took that here. But I knew that I was where I was headed, and I knew it was going to take a while to process. And so after graduating, it was May or early June, I went in the Foreign Service on the 1st of September.
That's great. Well, and tell us a little bit about your career and when you started in the Foreign Service. Where did that take you?
Well, it took me back to Paris, first of all. I don't think they had a policy of sending people who spoke French off to some other place where it wasn't spoken, but anyway, that was perhaps a bit of luck also. But my first post was Paris, and I ended up in the political section there, working on the French African colonies at that time. It was a period of transition from colonial status to independence and association with France. And so there was a good deal going on there, a lot of interest in Washington in what was happening. All these countries, Guinea and Senegal, what was called Dahomey then, Togo and so on. Upper Volta, as it was called at that time, was Nigeria and Mali and Mauritania. And so all of these things were in flux, and it was an interesting time, and one where I felt I was really involved in something.
That's great. And how did that continue to evolve for you?
Well, they became independent, but by that time I moved. This was a 2-year assignment, and I moved on. I was back in Washington in the Executive Secretariat for 2 years. This was before the big bureaucracy came to the State Department. Now the Executive Secretariat has 2 parts. It has the part that processes documents going to the Secretary, coming from the bureaus to the Secretary, reviews the documents to make sure they're in order, to make sure they're complete, sends them back if they aren't, so on and so forth. Comes up and answers questions about them if necessary. And then now there is the Watch Office, a very large institution staffed 24 hours a day. At that time, we didn't have the Watch Office. The line officers, that we were called, simply went up on weekends and spent our time there. So we were on call and on duty when things happened. On one of my watches, the Berlin Wall was set up. So
Wow.
that was it. That's the one I remember most vividly. But I also remember Kennedy coming to the Secretary's office, and Lumumba speaking out in the Secretary's reception room. And during that time, the fall of 1960 General Assembly, I was detailed to New York, to the mission there for French again. The representative of Kasavubu, who was our man in the Congo, as opposed to Lumumba, was there for the session representing the Congo government, the Kasavubu government. He had a 5th or 6th grade education. He didn't speak English. He had never been out of the Congo before. And so my job was to take him around. I'd go in the morning to his hotel room and read him the relevant articles of the New York Times in French, and take him to various places. Of course, in the General Assembly itself, he had French translation for everything. But anyway, I was so in the process of this, I happened to be in the General Assembly when Khrushchev took off his shoe and banged it on the table. That was another memorable moment. So, anyway.
That's interesting.
Yes.
And what else? Tell us what else you remember.
Well, from the Secretariat, I went to Beirut with Ambassador Armin Meyer, who had been Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Near Eastern Bureau. Met him in the course of my work in the Executive Secretariat, and he took me along as a political officer plus his interpreter for French. And so there, again, French played quite a role, and I went with him to meetings. He spoke a little French, but not much, and wasn't fluent. The main, at that time, all the main political figures spoke French. The Christians, that were certainly, they were all quite fluent, more fluent in French than in Arabic. and the Muslims as well spoke very good French. So I was able to participate in a lot of conversations there, and of course to write up the telegrams and so on and so forth. This was a relatively quiet time in Lebanon. There were, right after I arrived, there was an attempted coup. Some colonel came over from Syria and wanted to overthrow the regime. But the rest of the time was quiet. This was the era of President Shihab, who had come in more or less, well, not put up, but picked by the Eisenhower administration after the 1958 United States intervention in Lebanon. And so as I said, it was a quiet time, but a lot of interest in what was going on. We had a visit by Lyndon Johnson, who was vice president at that time, and by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But this was before the great rush of congressional travel. So we didn't have, as descend upon embassies today in interesting places, a continual stream of senators, congressmen, high senior officials from Washington who wanted to be taken care of and entertained and so on and so forth. So we were able to get our work done. The embassy was an open place. There was no particular security. This was before people started getting killed out there. Anyway, that was the old Foreign Service. From there, I went to. I wanted to continue. I had studied some Arabic on my own. I wanted to continue with Arabic, and I went to the Arabic language school in Tangier, and spent 9 months there, and then went on to Mauritania, to Nouakchott, which was had not too long before gained its full independence, but it was a little town. Basically, it consisted at that time of nothing more basically than government buildings built by the French for the government, houses for the French, various French advisors, for the few embassies that were there, and for the ministers of the government who didn't live in the houses themselves. They pitched tents outside, and that gives you an idea of the level of things. And the Arabic that I learned in Tangier, even the classical Arabic, they didn't really know. So I would speak to them in classical Arabic or in my Maghrebian dialect, and they thought that was a great laugh, because the Mauritanian dialect is quite a bit different anyway. So I was there for about 9 months. I was chargé d'affaires because there was no ambassador named yet. And the ambassador arrived, and in the meantime I had contracted some worms or something in Mauritania or somewhere, and went back to Washington, was reassigned back to Washington until that passed. So,
And when was this now? What year are we, roughly?
we were talking about Tangier from 63 to, I guess the summer and fall of September 63 to May of 64, and then until the spring of 65.
Okay, and then after Washington, where did you go from there?
Well, I went back to Washington to the Saudi Arabian desk officer, and from there, at one point, up to that point, the embassy in Israel had been staffed solely as a kind of ghetto. Nobody served on the Arab side had ever served in the embassy in Tel Aviv. It was considered at that point that if you served in the embassy in Tel Aviv, you would never be accepted on the Arab side any longer. It was supposedly sudden death. So the personnel people wanted to break this situation open and to find a candidate who would go to Israel, study Hebrew, serve in the embassy there, somebody who already spoke Arabic. There were no takers. I volunteered and I got it by default. So I had visited, when I was in Lebanon, I'd made a trip down to Israel.
You got it by default, except that you worked really hard and you learned Arabic.
Well, there was no, the fact that I was so-called an Arabist, and I was ready to volunteer to do it, was interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Tel Aviv and studied in Ulpan for several months, and then at the Tel Aviv University. And then in May of '68, went into the political section, where I was the number 2 person in the political section. And at the end of '69, when the head of the political section was transferred back to Washington, I went into that job, and it continued until the summer of '71.
Wow. And then where did you go from there?
Back to Washington, well, back to Princeton for a year. This was considered a mid-career career, of course. So I spent the academic year of 71, 72 at Princeton, and then came to Washington to be office director for Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, the northern tier Arab countries. So,
that's a big position.
it was an interesting position. We had, of course, an embassy in Lebanon and one in Jordan. An interest section had just been established in Baghdad, and we had nothing in Syria at the time. So in the aftermath of the '73 war, I came into the job in the summer of '72, fall of '72. The aftermath of the '73 war, which is October 1973, things began to open up for Syria. Kissinger, who had become Secretary of State by that time, invited the Syrian ambassador to the UN to come down to Washington, and I accompanied up to Kissinger's office and took notes on the meeting. And Kissinger and the Syrian ambassador basically arranged for an interest section to be established in Damascus. And so and Kissinger was planning his shuttle trips between Israel and Syria to establish a ceasefire and the various agreements that led to a stable situation from there on between Syria and Israel along the Golan Heights. I went out to Syria to do the preparations for this. To get there, this was a time when terrorism was beginning to be a problem. Our ambassador in Lebanon and I drove over from Damascus to Beirut with an M16 assault rifle on the floor of the car in front of him. The Italian embassy had been handling our affairs in Damascus. So the Italian charge was very helpful, and I went into the American embassy. It's been locked up, and and did the various preparations and was there for Kissinger's first visit into Damascus. And
do you still keep in touch with Kissinger?
oh, I was never, no. I was not one of Kissinger's aides. I was just the office director.
Okay.
And the office director, the aides really don't come in for this sort of thing. They go with Kissinger and take care of his various needs and set up a schedule and so on and so forth.
Mm.
But it's the regional bureaus that handle the substantive meetings. So no, I had some further dealings with the Kissinger later on as simply taking notes from meetings, that sort of thing. But nothing that would establish a personal relationship.
Mm-hmm. And where did you go from there?
From there I went to Calcutta as Consul General. I wanted to get away from the Middle East for a while, and India's a fascinating place. Anyway, the time in Calcutta proved to be a little bit boring because just about a month after I arrived, Mrs. Gandhi declared the emergency. In other words, she assumed emergency powers. Parliament was dissolved and all the functions, executive and legislative, were taken over by the executive, and there was a general clamp down on political activity. So anyway, I managed to stay 2 years through it, and then I came back to Washington, and it was in the policy planning staff, on the policy planning staff for a year, and then went on to become office director for Israel and Arab-Israeli affairs. At the time of the, this was at the time of Carter's big initiative for a peace between Israel and Egypt, and setting out the first agreement on the Palestinian territories as well. So I was involved in that, and it was a very interesting time as well.
Mm-hmm. We want to hear more, so tell us. I know you went somewhere after that.
Yes. Well, this involved a large number of trips by the Secretary of State to Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, by the Assistant Secretary of State to these places as well. And I went along on most of them, taking notes, helping in meetings, writing reports, so on, and so forth. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but one memorable time, I was traveling with Roy Atherton, who was the Assistant Secretary for the Middle East and South Asia at that time, and we were in Cairo, and he met with Sadat at Sadat's villa in Ismailia, right next to the Suez Canal. And we sat outside, and you could see the ships coming by. I mean, you see the sand and the ships all of a sudden coming by. But anyway, Sadat talked and talked and talked, and writing away furiously, and he began to repeat himself. So I stopped for a moment to rest my hand, and he looked at me and he said, "Right." So I wrote.
So you started writing, yes.
Anyway, there were moments like that, and Golda Meir, and
where else did you live after that?
Where did I go after that?
Where did you live, after that?
Where did I live at that time? In a place called Herzliya Pituach. It was just north of Tel Aviv, about at that time, about a 10-15 minute drive. was on the coast. The embassy had housing there, and to head of the political section, I had a house.
And where did you go after Israel?
Where did I go after Israel? After Israel, I'm talking about where I lived when I was in Israel, because it was after Israel and after the Office Director for Israel and Arab Israeli Affairs. Yes. I was scheduled to be ambassador to Mauritania. This was a change. Carter was out. Under Carter, I was scheduled to be ambassador to Senegal, which is a little bit bigger. But anyway, that went by the board, and the Republican administration came in. So my name was processed, and I was told that it was sent to the White House in, as I recall, in March of 1981, and that it would, in a few weeks, it would be everything would be fine. The president would call. Reagan had this idea that he should call all ambassadors and ask them, would you be my ambassador to so-and-so? So you had to wait for the president to telephone you. So I waited, and I waited, and I waited. April, May, June, 4th of July came up, and I went into the personnel office and said, look, it hasn't come yet, and I'm not interested in waiting any longer, let's do something else. And the personnel officer who was in charge said, what, you haven't been called? No, I haven't been called. He jumped up from his desk and ran over and looked, and anyway, what had happened was that Reagan had put the nominations, several of us, in his desk drawer and forgotten about it. So, anyway, in July I got called. In the meantime, complications had developed. The Mauritanians had been told by somebody on the Arab side that I was the office director for Israel, and had served in Israel, and was no doubt a flaming Zionist, and so they didn't want me.
Wow.
So at that point I was told I could wait around for another ambassadorial assignment, but that wouldn't be until the next year. We didn't know what it would be. But Ethiopia was there. We didn't have an ambassador in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians had turned from their alliance or identification with the United States to the Soviet Union. And so a lot of the American staff had been kicked out, and we had an ambassador there until 1980, I guess, yes. And he was asked to leave, so he was PNG'd. So it was a charge d'affaires position, but it was a big and interesting country, and the one involved in the Cold War was our big thing at that time. The one involved in that, and so I said, well, look, let's just send me to Ethiopia. That's fine, ready to go. And so I went in June of '82, and was there for 3 years, and a very eventful 3 years.
That's great. And after that?
After that, I got a year off in London at the Royal Institute for International Affairs, where I wrote a book about Ethiopia, and then I was processed as ambassador to Togo, and so I went to Togo for 2 years.
As ambassador?
What?
As ambassador?
Yeah, yes.
And then retired?
Yes,
Wow, and I understand that you have written several books. Tell us about those books.
Well, the one on Ethiopia I wrote during the year at Chatham House. and it was published in Britain and in the United States by Illinois University Press. After I came back and retired, I did a stint as a consultant for Human Rights Watch. They were just establishing Middle East Watch, which is their Middle East section. And this was on Iraq. So I did their first report on Iraq, which I finished in, let's see, 89. Yes, I finished in February of 1990. It was a book-length report. It was published first as a report, and then Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And so Human Rights Watch jumped and published it as a book. So it had at that time it was able to get a certain number of sales anyway. So that was the second. After that I did a book on the assassination of two of my colleagues in Khartoum in 1973, Cleo Knoll and Kurt Moore. I had worked with Moore in the Near Eastern Division of the State Department after Mauritania, so I knew him well. That was published by Indiana University Press and by the center over here at Georgetown, the Foreign Affairs Center. Then a book on the war of attrition between Israel and Egypt between 68 and 70, which was ended along the Suez Canal, which was ended by a U.S. intervention. I had a lot of notes from my time in Israel and contacts there that helped a lot. And our ambassador in Cairo helped me with research on I was able to travel to the area for it. Anyway, that book. Then I worked with Roberta on a book on internally displaced people called Exodus Within Borders. And 2 years ago I self-published a novel. And,
that's great. That's exciting. Are you still writing?
I wrote a number of articles. I worked with the Kurds, wrote a number of articles for freedom at issue and so on and so forth. So that wraps it up pretty much.
And are you currently writing?
I have no big subjects at the present time now.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much. I did want to ask you one other question I think current students today would really benefit from, and that is given your illustrious career, what advice what advice might you have for current students today?
If you're planning to go in the Foreign Service, you should understand that it's become a very bureaucratic organization. It's become a very vast bureaucracy. I don't mean to discourage anyone, but you should know what you're getting into. It's entirely unrecognizable from the time that I was there, so I can't really tell anyone exactly what to expect, except that it has been there's been a proliferation of bureaus, proliferation of advisors, and above all, the management people have taken over and established rules here, there, and the next place, which I'm sure have some benefit, but also have the benefit of assuring their own employment. And if I had to do it over again at this time, I'm not sure what I would do exactly. I think there are other things. Probably at this time you try to get a mix of background experience. Working on the Hill, with an NGO, the International Crisis Group that does excellent work in reporting on issues abroad, think tanks and that sort of thing. But if you really want to do foreign affairs, foreign policy, you need to, I think, work in government somewhere on this, and for a period of several years. But probably would be more interesting to, and more broadly, to go all over the place if you can. But the other thing about the State Department is that with the advent of terrorism, the embassies are no longer open places, and in so many places you can't just go out like that and mix. And embassies have often been relocated from center of town to somewhere outside of town, resembling a fortress. So this is a very limiting factor. Also, the other limiting factor is the advent of communications, the internet, and you don't have to be in country X to read the newspapers that are there in the morning and tell you to know what's going on. In some places, ambassadors have really become advanced planners for all of the visiting congressmen and senators and senior Washington officials who descend upon the embassies, and certainly the staffs become heavily involved in that. I had already in Israel from 67 to 71, I had a good bit of that because, of course, Israel always was a target for congressional visits, but elsewhere as well. And so from being the person on the spot who knew what was going on the spot, and nobody else really could compare, you become someone who's out there, supposedly with with a local contact, if the security situation permits it, and you can provide some broadening and some extra advice that you wouldn't get from just sitting in Washington. But I'm not sure how much the difference, if there's a great difference between the two.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciated hearing your stories.
I hope it's useful.
Hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, same to you.